Before we begin, do you enjoy listening to our show? Consider subscribing on your preferred podcast platform or supporting us on Patreon for as little as $3 a month. Link is in the show notes. I'm Harper Finley, and this is Nightwatch Files. Before we step into the timeline of tonight's case, I want to recommend the primary source material that made this episode possible. The book, A Perversion of Justice, written by Catherine Medico and Molly Barrows. If you want to read the actual court records and interviews that shaped this narrative, there is a link to the book right down in the show notes. Using that link to get your copy helps support the independent research for this show at no extra cost to you. Now, let's get into today's case. On a cold November night in 2001, Ed Harris awoke disturbed by loud popping sounds coming from outside his bedroom window. Peering into the darkness, he saw the home of his neighbor, Terry King, engulfed in a raging fire. Harris immediately dialed 911, frantically telling the dispatcher that the Cantonment, Florida house was burning and that Terry and his two young boys had to be inside because their car was parked in the driveway. When firefighter David Jordan arrived at the scene on Muskogee Road, he was met by a blinding orange inferno with flames shooting 30 feet into the air. Harris ran toward Jordan, screaming over the roar of the blaze that the family was trapped inside and begging the first responders to get them out. Firefighter Marcus Williams kicked the front door open, dropping to the ground to crawl through the thick black smoke while searching for the father and his children. On the other side of the house, firefighter Brandon Beecher blindly crawled through the darkened living room, staying low and sweeping his hands over the furniture to check for victims. As Beecher patted the sofa, his hand bumped an object resting on the arm of the couch, sending an icy chill up his spine. He realized he was grasping a human foot. Jerking his hand back, he raised his heavy flashlight to illuminate a gruesome scene. Terry King was sitting in his recliner in a surprisingly serene posture. His hands folded across his stomach, his moccasin-clad feet propped up, and a full cup of coffee resting undisturbed next to his leg. However, the right side of his forehead had a fist-sized hole framed by broken bone fragments, with blood splattered across a nearby lampshade, the walls, and the ceiling. Realizing these injuries had nothing to do with the fire, Beecher pushed the button on his radio and shakily reported to his colleagues that he had found a body. As the firefighters extinguished the remaining flames and vented the heavy accumulation of smoke, the poignant signs of a home with children emerged from the darkness. Toys lay scattered, kids' laundry sat in piles, and open boxes of Christmas decorations were waiting to be hung. However, after a thorough search of the home, the firefighters realized the two young boys Harris had reported being inside were nowhere to be found. In the deeply religious and conservative environment of the mid-1950s, the foundation of the King family was formed. 24-year-old Wilbur King, a man who balanced the physical labor of his profession as a butcher with his chosen calling as a minister, married 17-year-old Joyce. Joyce was a petite, thin, and delicate young woman with modest attire who had always harbored a simple but profound dream of becoming a devoted homemaker. Her deep dedication to her family and her unwavering faith perfectly epitomized the core values of the Pentecostal church they attended. For the newlyweds, religion was the absolute center of their universe. Wilbur often spent his time either carving up a cow for work or gripping the edges of a pulpit to deliver impassioned sermons to his congregation. The couple's social and family life revolved almost entirely around the Pentecostal church, and during spiritual revivals, the Kings could be found attending services as many as 5 times a week. Within the first 5 years of their marriage, Wilbur and Joyce welcomed 3 children into the world, dedicating each of them to the Lord and bringing them to church regularly. Joyce proved to be an intensely protective mother, who felt strongly about keeping her children close to the safety of their home. Rather than allowing her kids to spend the night at friends' houses, she insisted on inviting other children over, finding comfort only when her own were securely nearby. Music quickly became the heartbeat of the King household. Joyce would often delight her growing brood by singing beautiful gospel melodies in her delicate soprano voice, while their oldest child and only daughter, Patricia, played the keyboard. It was into this strict, fiercely protective, and deeply musical Christian environment that their youngest child, Terry Lee King, was born. Recognizing their children's interests, Wilbur and Joyce sacrificed financially to provide the siblings with musical instruments and lessons. Eager to join in the family's music making, Terry's older brother, Greg, learned to play the guitar, and Terry quickly found his place backing him up on the drums. While most of their peers in the 1960s were busy listening and dancing to the Beatles, young Terry and his siblings spent their time closely honing their skills on their instruments, playing their own brand of Christian tunes. Terry King experienced very little life outside of his family's household in his infancy, but as he reached his teenage years, he did venture outside the home to attend Escambia High School. But this foray into public education was relatively short-lived. In the mid-1970s, the city of Pensacola struggled with serious racial conflicts. By 1978, a race riot engulfed the high school, prompting frightened parents to rush to the campus armed with guns. Terrified for her son's safety, Joyce quickly withdrew Terry from the school, effectively pulling his daily life back into the complete confines and security of the King household. Under his mother's protective watch, Terry was homeschooled, keeping him largely isolated from the typical teenage experiences and cultural shifts of the late 1970s. While many adolescents of that era were swept up by bulky 8-track tapes and the nationwide spread of disco fever, Terry and his older siblings, Patricia and Greg, remained steadfastly anchored in their Pentecostal faith. However, the intensely tight-knit family structure that had defined Terry's entire youth eventually began to fracture. When Terry reached the age of 18, his parents, Wilbur and Joyce, came to the realization that they had simply grown apart. After 25 years of marriage, the devout couple made the life-altering decision to divorce. Wilbur moved out of the family home, purchasing a small house in the neighboring community of Pace so he could remain close enough to continue seeing his children. Terry, who was 18 at the time, and his older siblings, Patricia and Greg, remained living at the family's home in Pensacola with their mother, Joyce. Terry regularly made trips to visit his father at his new home, establishing a new routine that guided him out of his highly sheltered adolescence and eventually led the way into his young adulthood. These visits to Pace ultimately served as the primary catalyst for his maturation into a young man. In 1986, 21-year-old Terry King was visiting his father when he first crossed paths with 17-year-old Janet French. As an introverted young man emerging from a highly sheltered upbringing, Terry was instantly captivated by the vivacious blonde Southerner. The two were a striking physical match. At 5'2", petite Janet was perfectly suited for Terry's 5'5" frame, and her long, golden curls created a dramatic contrast against his jet-black hair. Janet possessed a natural beauty, highlighted by her dimples, perfect teeth, and dancing brown eyes. Terry, who was known for his gentle nature and good heart, greatly admired Janet's bubbly, gregarious personality. Because she naturally drew all the social attention to herself, Janet's lively spirit provided a comforting dynamic for the introverted Terry, who welcomed her ability to command a room. The attraction between them was mutual and immediate. Janet took the initiative to call Terry the very next day, sparking a romance that escalated quickly. Their initial courtship swiftly blossomed into a full-on domestic partnership. Before long, Janet moved directly out of her parents' home and into a shared residence with Terry. Although the young couple never officially married, they were absolutely delighted when Janet discovered she was pregnant, leading to the birth of their first son, Derek, on May 4, 1988, and their second son, Alex, on July 12, 1989. However, this rapid transition from living under her parents' roof to cohabiting and raising infants with Terry would quickly take its toll. The birth of their second son was quickly overshadowed by the harsh realities of raising two young children, and Terry King and Janet French did not transition smoothly into parenthood. Burdened by poverty, lacking a higher education, and unable to afford a car, the young parents found it exceedingly difficult to get ahead financially. While Terry stepped up to the responsibilities of family life by reading to the boys and caring for them when they were sick, 19-year-old Janet began to feel entirely suffocated. Having moved directly from her parents' home into a domestic partnership with Terry, the teenage mother longed to experience the world free from the heavy restrictions of raising infants. She soon fell into a deep depression, fell out of love with Terry, and started distancing herself by staying away from the home for hours and eventually overnight. Although she would return with apologies that Terry readily accepted, he was forced to turn to a private journal to vent his profound sadness and frustration over their crumbling relationship. The family dynamic fractured further when Janet became pregnant by another man and gave birth to twin boys. Unaware at the time that the twins were not his biological sons, Terry stayed by her side during the delivery and struggled to support the family of 6 by working a minimum-wage construction job that required a long, grueling commute to Mobile, Alabama. Desperate to alleviate their financial burdens, the couple answered an advertisement promising large weekly payouts for exotic dancers. Setting aside her strict Pentecostal upbringing, Janet took a job at a topless bar called Benny's Dollhouse. While Terry stayed home to care for the 4 boys, Janet began working nights and quickly fell into the club's potent party environment. This new lifestyle pulled her even further away from her family. The situation escalated when Janet began dating the club's manager, making no effort to hide the new romance from Terry. She would disappear for days at a time, leaving an overwhelmed Terry desperate and alone to feed 4 hungry little boys. Janet ultimately admitted to Terry that the twins were fathered by someone else, though Terry insisted he loved the toddlers as his own. Eventually choosing to abandon the heavy responsibilities of motherhood, Janet officially left Terry to move in with her new boyfriend, packing up the twins so that Terry could continue to work. For the first time in 5 years, Terry found himself without a partner, but his brief moment to catch his breath and stabilize his life with his sons, Derek and Alex, was remarkably short-lived. Just 2 days after her abrupt departure, Janet returned to the house and dropped the twins back into Terry's lap. She explained that the toddlers were making too much noise and getting into her new boyfriend's belongings. The arrangement shifted to a bizarre and exhausting dynamic where Janet stayed at Terry's house during the day to watch the boys, but then returned to her boyfriend's apartment to spend the night as soon as the children went to bed. Overwhelmed by the situation, Terry turned to his private journal to process his heartbreak and frustration over the casual treatment of the young boys. He wrote about the profound unfairness of the situation, observing that people too often treat children as objects of personal property rather than fragile little people with feelings and emotions that desperately need to be protected. As the heavy burden of supporting a family of 6 fell squarely on his shoulders, Terry quickly realized he could not manage the daily needs of 4 young boys while trying to earn a living. The escalating financial and emotional strain eventually forced him to make a devastating choice. Desperate for assistance, Terry turned to his extended family for help. 5-year-old Derek was sent to live with Janet's mother and stepfather, Linda and Jimmy Walker. Meanwhile, 4-year-old Alex was taken in by Janet's father and stepmother, Jimmy and Lisa French. By 1994, the family was entirely fractured. Terry remained at home to raise the twin toddlers, while his 2 oldest boys were absorbed into the homes of their grandparents, profoundly altering the trajectory of their childhoods. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Five-year-old Derek blossomed under the care of Janet's mother and stepfather, Linda and Jimmy. The Walkers showered him with affection and introduced him to the pleasures of rural life, and Derek took great pride in fishing with his grandfather off the pier. His academic performance dramatically improved. He went from failing grades and constant tardiness while living with his parents to passing marks and perfect attendance in kindergarten. However, Terry grew increasingly uncomfortable with the Walkers' influence. He worried his son was being raised as a redneck and strongly disapproved of Jimmy Walker's beer drinking, use of profanity, and the loaded guns kept inside the home. Meanwhile, 4-year-old Alex's transition into the home of Janet's father and stepmother, Jimmy and Lisa French, was marked by hostility and grief over his mother's sudden absence. Alex kept his distance from Lisa, viewing her as a replacement mother figure, and even slapped her when she attempted to embrace him. He also acted out destructively, conspiring with the French's son to ruin a treasured collection of vintage board games hidden in a closet. Yet, with firm boundaries and enrollment in a local daycare center run by a veteran teacher, Alex gradually settled down, transforming into a polite, studious child who was eager to please. As the older boys adjusted to their new homes, the dynamic between Terry and Janet effectively dissolved. Without a partner again, Terry's situation grew increasingly desperate as he grappled not only with crushing financial debt, but also with a debilitating medical condition. He suffered from narcolepsy, a physical ailment that caused him to unexpectedly lose consciousness while driving, working, or caring for the children. The catalyst for a massive change arrived when Lisa French realized she could not care for Alex indefinitely. She informed Terry about the Heritage Youth Academy, a small charity-funded refuge for boys in crisis. Recognizing his inability to financially or physically sustain his fragmented family, and unhappy with the environment Derek was exposed to at the Walkers, Terry seized the opportunity. He believed the orphanage could provide a safe, conservative Christian atmosphere where all 4 of his sons could finally be reunited and cared for together until he could get back on his feet. In October 1994, with a tearful separation and a local newspaper plea for community financial help, Terry placed Derek, Alex, and the twins into the orphanage, dramatically shifting the course of their young lives once again. However, this sanctuary proved to be remarkably short-lived. After only 8 months, the facility's funding dried up, forcing the boys into a chaotic transition that permanently scattered the family. The toddler twins were permanently adopted by a well-to-do local family. 5-year-old Alex was placed with a foster family, but became so despondent over the loss of his family that he cried almost non-stop for a month, prompting the overwhelmed foster parents to return him to his father. Terry, determined to keep his son, clung to Alex, and the two embarked on a nomadic existence, moving from place to place and occasionally living in a travel trailer. Meanwhile, 6-year-old Derek was taken in by Frank and Nancy Lay, a wealthy couple from the neighboring community of Pace, who had initially met Derek and Alex after seeing their picture in the local newspaper's plea for charity. The Lays had started by taking the boys for weekend outings, quickly discovering just how sheltered and impoverished they were. During a trip to the mall, the boys arrived in mismatched clothes and oversized shoes, acted wildly in the family's van, and screamed in absolute terror at their first sight of an escalator. Once Derek moved in permanently with the Lays, he struggled profoundly to adjust. Despite being highly intelligent and eventually placed in a gifted school program, Derek suffered from ADHD, acted out by stealing small items and playing with fire, and longed desperately to be reunited with his biological parents. The dynamic between Terry and the Lays was fraught with tension. Terry instructed them to keep Derek away from his maternal grandparents, the Walkers, and the Lays often kept Derek isolated from his mother, believing Terry and Janet were incapable of providing proper care. Terry's work and financial life remained a crushing struggle. To support himself and Alex, he worked a grueling night shift at a local print shop and spent his weekends selling odds and ends at the T&W flea market. Without reliable transportation, his visits with Derek were sparse, though he once spent a small fortune taking a taxicab from Pensacola to Pace, making the driver wait outside for 3 hours just so he could see his son. Desperate for help with Alex's care while he worked these difficult hours, Terry reached out to his mother, Joyce, in January 1997, asking her to move back to Pensacola from Texas. Joyce agreed and quickly became a stabilizing force for Alex, taking him to church on Sundays, getting him involved in the youth choir, and expanding his social life. Despite Joyce's help, Terry's financial reality kept his family fractured. He and Joyce consulted an attorney in hopes of regaining custody of Derek from Janet and the Lays, but Terry was heartbroken to learn he simply could not afford the legal fight. The relentless financial strain and severe car trouble eventually opened the door for a new figure to enter their lives. Terry's vehicle desperately needed a new motor that he could not afford, leading him to cross paths with Ricky Chavis. Chavis had transformed his fenced-in yard into a working mechanic's workshop, complete with tools, a hoist, and scattered car parts, and generously offered the struggling father full use of the property. Terry spent countless late nights working on his car at the yard, occasionally sleeping over. For the next couple of years, the relationship between the two men evolved significantly. Terry began to rely heavily on Chavis as more than just a mechanic, but as a trusted friend who helped him pay bills and frequently watched young Alex while Terry worked his long shifts. Terry's living situation only saw genuine improvement in February 2001, when a successful businessman and friend from the flea market, Kevin Bailey, leased Terry and Alex a clean, older wooden house in Cantonment, giving the father and son a stable place to finally call their own. They took immense pride in the property, spending their time painting and planting flower beds around the house. Alex proudly showed off his own bedroom to Kevin, and the two often visited the Bailey home to fish and enjoy their hospitality. However, several months after they moved in, Kevin became concerned when Alex grew noticeably subdued and stopped smiling as much. Kevin attributed the boy's melancholy to his isolation and lack of interaction with other children, urging Terry to enroll him in a traditional school, but the father remained stubbornly committed to homeschooling his son. While Alex was grappling with his isolation, his older brother Derek was spiraling out of control while living with his foster family, Frank and Nancy Lay. Now in the 7th grade, Derek was desperately acting out to impress his peers, engaging in dangerous behaviors like putting pressure on his neck veins to pass out and sniffing lighter fluid on the school bus. Frustrated and overwhelmed, the Lays finally decided they had enough and asked Terry to send Derek to a military-style school. When Terry refused, the Lays desperately tried to hand the boy over to his biological mother, Janet, who declined the offer by claiming her new husband didn't like children and they already had 2 cats. Although Derek's maternal grandmother, Linda Walker, eagerly volunteered to take him in, Terry insisted that he wanted his eldest son back home. Terry jumped at the chance to reunite his family, but after 7 years of living with the Lays, Derek did not welcome the abrupt move. When Nancy packed his belongings in September 2001, the devastated boy lay on the floor and sobbed over losing the only real stability he had ever known. The actual moving day was fraught with tension, as Linda and Jimmy Walker showed up uninvited to the Lay residence, leading to a tense standoff where Terry refused to let the grandparents see the boy or know their true address. Despite the rocky transition, Derek's return ultimately infused Terry's life with an element of energy and excitement that had long been missing. Father and son engaged in deep heart-to-heart talks, with Terry explaining that he had always wanted Derek back, but the Lays had discouraged it. Although Derek initially missed his foster family and was reluctant to trust this new arrangement, he slowly opened up to his father. For the first time in 7 years, Alex had a live-in playmate, and Derek's lifelong dream of being reunited with his biological family was finally realized. However, the addition to the household only compounded Terry's existing financial woes. In the first weeks of October, Terry found himself completely out of cash and unable to satisfy his electric bill. After delivering several warnings, the utility company shut off the power to the King home. When Ricky Chavis learned of the family's dire situation, he stepped in to act as their ultimate lifeline. Rather than offering Terry a loan to cover the outstanding bill, Chavis suggested that Terry, Derek, and Alex simply move into the small trailer he shared with his brother, Mike, until Terry could save enough to turn the electricity back on. With no power and no other viable options, Terry accepted the offer. In the first week of October, just in time to celebrate Chavis' 40th birthday, the King family moved into the cramped mobile home. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Although the quarters were tight, the arrangement with the Chavises initially went smoothly, with Terry enrolling Derek and Alex in Ransom Middle School and granting Chavis written permission to pick them up from classes. However, this intimate access allowed Chavis to see Terry's deepest vulnerabilities, particularly the father's deep distrust of the boy's maternal grandparents, Linda and Jimmy Walker, which led to a significant shift in Chavis's behavior. After Terry forced Derek to call the Walkers and sever all contact, he seized the opportunity to sow discord. He began secretly calling the Walkers, presenting himself as a concerned friend and falsely claiming that Terry was not only abusing the boys, but had also threatened to kill Jimmy Walker. Ricky Chavis exhibited a prodigious mechanical aptitude early in life, easily dismantling radios by age 3 and rewiring lamps by 5. The stability of his childhood shattered in 1966 when his parents engaged in a bitter divorce, leaving Ricky and his younger brother Mike in the care of their paternal grandparents. When Ricky was 14, his father remarried and abruptly uprooted the brothers, placing them into a severely overcrowded and abusive foster home run by parents motivated solely by the state stipends. Surrounded by hardened foster children, Ricky endured relentless bullying, physical assaults, and witnessed horrific acts of animal cruelty. The trauma of this environment left him emotionally stunted, but fostered his ability to manipulate and ingratiate himself with others as a survival mechanism. He eventually chose to return to his grandparents' home as an older teenager, attending Tate High School and George Stone Vocational School, where he honed his electrical and mechanical talents. Using his skills, Ricky transformed his grandparents' property into a popular neighborhood hangout, complete with a workshop and a steady flow of alcohol and drugs. He quickly realized that vulnerable teenage boys from broken homes were highly susceptible to his influence, and he systematically groomed them using marijuana, liquor, and pornography. His criminal enterprise expanded rapidly as he recruited his young followers to assist him in a string of burglaries, stealing everything from go-karts to vehicles and regularly siphoning gasoline from local businesses. His reckless behavior ultimately resulted in a conviction for grand theft and contributing to the delinquency of a minor, landing the 19-year-old in the county jail. Shortly after, he was sentenced to 4 years at the Apalachicola Correctional Institution for stealing a car, though he was released after serving only half his sentence. Chavis' criminal record soon darkened from property theft to predatory sexual abuse. Despite repeated allegations, meaningful intervention proved elusive. Some victims were reluctant to cooperate, while others feared retaliation or carried overwhelming feelings of shame. The abuse often remained hidden until years later, allowing Chavis to continue offending while cultivating the image of a helpful neighbor and skilled mechanic. By the late 1990s, Ricky Chavis had spent years refining the methods he used to identify, groom, and manipulate vulnerable children. To those who knew only his public persona, he appeared charismatic, resourceful, and willing to help families in difficult circumstances. Behind closed doors, however, investigators would later describe a man who carefully exploited desperation and instability for his own gratification. When Terry King first encountered Ricky Chavis in 2001, he saw only someone capable of repairing a broken vehicle and offering assistance during a period of financial hardship. He had no way of knowing that Chavis had spent decades cultivating the very techniques that would allow him to insinuate himself into the lives of vulnerable families, or that his own family was about to become Chavis' next target. While manipulating the adults from behind the scenes, Chavis methodically went to work on the children. He spent hours playing games with the boys, searching for any emotional wedge he could drive between them and their father. Positioning himself as their protector, Chavis told Derek and Alex that Terry's strict discipline and staring constituted mental abuse. He undermined Terry's authority by secretly supplying the 12 and 13-year-old boys with marijuana and cigarettes, successfully fostering their distrust of their father and shifting their loyalty to himself. Despite this insidious grooming, the household shared some lighthearted moments, decorating the yard for Halloween with black lights and a flying ghost, while Terry laughingly allowed Alex to temporarily color his blonde hair black for the holiday. The fragile peace shattered in the final days of October as the stress of too many people in the small trailer caused tempers to fray. The breaking point arrived one evening when Alex was playing video games loudly in the tiny living room. Terry yelled his son's name and shot him a stern glare, prompting Alex to immediately turn down the volume. Chavis, harboring a dark and powerful obsession with the boy, became enraged by the simple parental reprimand. He stormed out, drove his car recklessly down the street to blow off steam, and returned to order Terry outside for a confrontation. For 10 minutes, Chavis fiercely lectured the father, accusing him of destroying Alex's self-esteem. In that chilling moment, Terry suddenly realized that Chavis was monstrously possessive of his youngest son. The following morning, Terry approached his friend Lewis Tyson for a loan to cover his outstanding utility bill, and on November 1st, Terry packed up his boys and permanently departed the Chavis trailer. Determined to sever ties, Terry immediately drove his sons to Ransom Middle School the next morning and instructed the front office secretary, Debbie Altop, that the boys would now ride the school bus home. Unfortunately, Terry neglected to officially remove Ricky from the school's sign-out list. Panicking over the separation, Ricky deceitfully contacted the school, claiming Terry had asked him to watch the boys until he finished work. That afternoon, Ricky intercepted Alex and Derek, and on the drive home, he dropped a psychological bomb designed to shatter their family loyalty. Feigning reluctance, Ricky told a devastated Alex that Terry was not his biological father, claiming Janet had been unfaithful and pointing out that Alex's blonde hair contrasted sharply with Terry's dark features. The insidious lie took immediate root, prompting a deeply troubled Alex to visit the school library the next day to study a book called Understanding DNA in a desperate search for answers. When Terry discovered Ricky had picked the boys up, he was furious and formally barred both Ricky and the boys' maternal grandmother from checking them out of school. Terry rigidly rebuffed Ricky's subsequent attempts to mend the relationship, which included offering to fix a light pole and repairing an old washing machine for the Kings. However, during one tense, unannounced visit, Ricky managed to slip into the boys' bedroom and whisper instructions for Alex to secretly meet him out front of the school on Friday. Ricky successfully slipped away with Alex in the Friday school pickup rush and drove him to a field in Alabama, where he manipulated the boy with tales of a former teenage runaway who had lived with him for years, urging Alex to do the same and to bring Derek along. The situation reached a critical breaking point on Saturday, November 10th, when Terry agreed to meet Ricky for breakfast at McDonald's. During the meal, Ricky boldly asked Terry to let him keep the boys, citing Terry's exhausting work schedule. Terry finally saw the undeniable truth. Ricky was after his sons, and he firmly refused the request. Returning home, Terry found Alex sullen and defiant, addressing him as Terry instead of Dad, and admitting he wanted to be with Ricky. Terrified by the older man's powerful grip on his son, Terry panicked and concocted a desperate lie. He told the boys they were moving to Kentucky to live with their mother, hoping the geographical distance would break Ricky's spell. To sell the ruse, Terry officially withdrew them from school on Monday, announcing that Friday would be their last day. Throughout that final week, a terrified Terry kept his sons under constant surveillance, driving them to school, picking them up immediately, and taking them to work with him until late at night. However, his lie ultimately backfired. Driven by Ricky's promises of a life free of rules and desperate to avoid being exiled to a mother they barely knew, the boys viewed Friday as their last chance to escape. When the final school bell rang, Alex and Derek boarded the bus, but instead of waiting for their father at home, they sprang into action. By the time Terry walked through his front door just before 5 o'clock, he found his house eerily quiet, his locked filing cabinet broken into, the boys' birth certificates missing, and his sons gone. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. While Terry immediately assumed his former in-laws had abducted the boys, Alex and Derek had actually called Ricky Chavis from a local convenience store, and the 40-year-old family friend had eagerly picked them up. Instead of roughing it as typical runaways, the boys spent their days living a life of indulgence at Chavis's trailer, where he systematically dismantled their behavioral boundaries by allowing them to stay up late, play video games, and smoke marijuana. To keep the brothers concealed from their frantic father, Chavis utilized a secret crawlspace beneath his mobile home. Accessed through a hidden trapdoor concealed under a piece of carpet in his laundry room, the small subterranean room was outfitted with a lamp, blankets, pillows, and a smoking pipe. Meanwhile, Terry was consumed by panic and sick with worry over his missing children. He filed a formal missing persons report with the Escambia County Sheriff's Office, placing Alex and Derek on state and national registries. Using pictures of his sons stored on a digital camera he had borrowed from Chavis, Terry printed missing posters and blanketed the community with them. In his desperate search, Terry frequently visited Chavis's trailer, hoping his friend could provide assistance. Whenever Terry's car pulled up to the front gate, Chavis would hurriedly stash the boys under the trapdoor, leaving the exhausted father to stand mere feet above his hidden children, while Chavis feigned ignorance and offered false sympathies. Chavis even lent Terry a two-way radio under the guise of helping him coordinate the search, though he actually used it to monitor Terry's movements and ensure his own dark secret remained safe. Believing his former in-laws had taken his sons and possessed the keys to his house, a terrified Terry eventually refused to sleep in his own home, opting instead to spend the cold November nights shivering in his car at the T&W flea market. The clandestine arrangement began to unravel after a week of confinement in the cramped trailer. Derek, who was without his prescribed ADHD medication, grew exceedingly restless and asked Chavis to drive him to Pace to visit a friend. Left to his own devices after his friend departed, Derek walked to the home of a girl he knew from school who lived near his former foster parents, Frank and Nancy Lay. Derek confessed to the girl that he and Alex were runaways and were staying with Chavis, who was letting them skip school and smoke marijuana. When Derek later tried to call Chavis for a ride back and got no answer, the girl's parents contacted the Lays, who quickly arrived on the scene. A panicked Derek attempted to flee, but Frank Lay caught up with the highly agitated boy. Alarmed by Derek's condition and his admission that an older man had helped them run away behind their father's back, the Lays contacted the Santa Rosa Sheriff's Office. Deputy Leonard Thomas arrived, ran Derek's name through his computer, and immediately confirmed his runaway status. Despite Derek's desperate pleas not to be sent back and the Lays' strong advice against it, the deputies returned the 13-year-old to his father. Protecting Chavis, Derek lied to Terry, claiming that he and Alex had simply been camping out in the Pace woods. This fabricated story sent the exhausted father back out into the cold night, knocking on doors and frantically searching the dark woods for his youngest son, completely unaware that Alex was warm and safely tucked away behind the walls of Ricky Chavis's trailer. Chavis harbored a dark and powerful obsession with 12-year-old Alex King. His infatuation was absolute and fiercely possessive. He kept a photograph of the boy taped to the mirrored headboard of his bed and carried a carefully wrapped newspaper clipping of Alex's face in the breast pocket of his clothing. By systematically grooming the lonely child, Chavis successfully convinced Alex that his father was mentally abusive and did not truly love him. The psychological manipulation was profoundly effective. In a hidden notebook bearing the warning, "Do not read," the young boy poured out his feelings, writing, "Before I met Rick, I was straight, but now I am gay," alongside declarations of love and their initials drawn inside a heart. Chavis regularly lavished the neglected boy with affection, video games, pornography, and marijuana, successfully securing his unquestioning loyalty. Left alone with Alex, Chavis was consumed by sheer panic. He realized that Derek's return to Terry was a massive liability. The older brother was a loose cannon who knew too many dark secrets. Derek had witnessed Chavis holding Alex on his lap, French kissing him, and taking the 12-year-old into his bed. Chavis knew that if Derek exposed this sexual relationship to Terry, the enraged father would undoubtedly contact the police, sending Chavis back to prison for life. Recognizing that his pedophile's paradise was on the verge of collapsing, Chavis decided he had no choice but to send Alex home on a mission of damage control. To execute this maneuver, the cunning manipulator orchestrated a miraculous rescue. On Sunday afternoon, November 25th, Chavis phoned Alex's grandmother, Joyce Tracy, feigning concern and offering to travel to Pace to help her look for the missing boy. Shortly after arriving in the neighboring community, Chavis called her again, this time to share the good news that he had supposedly just found Alex. Chavis arranged to meet the relieved grandmother at a local Tom Thumb convenience store. While waiting for Terry and Derek to arrive at the scene, Chavis took Alex across the street to a McDonald's, using the final moments alone to give his young lover crucial instructions. He told Alex to make sure they were home by midnight, that he would come to pick them up, and to ensure that the back door of the house was left unlocked. When Terry King finally pulled into the parking lot, overwhelmed with relief to see his missing son, Chavis immediately intercepted the father and pulled him aside before Terry could even embrace the boy. Following his instructions, Alex greeted his grandmother and quickly slid into Terry's car alongside Derek. When 17-year veteran firefighter David Jordan arrived at the Cantonment, Florida home, he was confronted with a blinding orange inferno with flames shooting 30 feet into the air. Neighbor Ed Harris, who had frantically called 911 after hearing popping sounds from the blowing windows, ran toward Jordan screaming that Terry King and his 2 young boys were trapped inside. Firefighter Marcus Williams kicked the front door open, dropped to the ground, and crawled into the thick, black smoke to search the rooms for the father and his children. On the other side of the house, firefighter Brandon Beecher blindly crawled through the darkened living room, sweeping his hands across the sofa cushions to check for victims. His hand bumped an object, and an icy chill ran up his spine as he realized he was grasping a human foot. Shining his heavy flashlight, Beecher illuminated a gruesome scene. Terry King sat relaxed in a recliner with his hands folded across his stomach and a full coffee cup resting undisturbed next to his leg. While his posture appeared perfectly serene, the right side of his forehead bore a fist-sized hole with blood flowing down his face, and blood was splattered on a nearby lampshade, the walls, and the ceiling up to 12 feet away. Beecher shakily pushed the button on his radio and reported to his colleagues, "We've got a body in here." After extinguishing the remaining flames in the back bedrooms, firefighters vented the heavy accumulation of smoke and began to see the poignant signs of a home with children. Toys were scattered, kids' laundry sat in piles, and boxes of Christmas decorations lay open. However, after a thorough search, the firefighters found no sign of 13-year-old Derek and 12-year-old Alex, leaving the crew relieved that there were no more bodies to be found. The realization that the children were missing shifted the focus of authorities when homicide investigators John Sanderson and Terry Kilgore arrived at the smoldering scene shortly after 5 in the morning. Inside the charred ruins, investigators identified accelerant pour patterns on the floor and a crushed can of lighter fluid in the master bedroom doorway, confirming the fire had been deliberately set to conceal the brutal bludgeoning. Outside the crime scene, Sanderson was approached by the boy's step-grandfather, Jimmy Walker. Walker informed the investigator that a family friend, Ricky Chavis, had called him late the previous night to report that the boys were safe at home with Terry, and then called again at 5:45 a.m., claiming he had heard about the fire on his police scanner. This revelation prompted Sanderson to immediately begin tracking down Terry's family to deliver the grim news. After delivering the heartbreaking news of Terry King's murder to his mother and brother, investigator John Sanderson shifted his focus entirely to finding the missing 12 and 13-year-old boys. His first steps involved piecing together a timeline of the family's final days, which immediately cast a spotlight on their 40-year-old friend, Ricky Chavis. When Sanderson and his partner, Terry Kilgore, interviewed Frank Lay, Derek's former foster father, Lay revealed that the boys had recently run away and hidden at Chavis's home. More alarmingly, Lay disclosed that Derek had explicitly stated Alex hated his father and wanted to kill him, and that Chavis had allegedly helped them plan their initial escape and protected them from their father. The detective's suspicions deepened when they interviewed Lewis Tyson, who had hosted Terry and his sons just hours before the bludgeoning. Tyson noted the boys were acting incredibly strange, with Alex defiantly calling his father Terry, and added that Terry had planned to sleep on the couch that night because he simply did not trust his sons and feared they would run away again. As Sanderson processed these disturbing findings, the manhunt came to an abrupt end when he received a phone call informing him that Ricky Chavis and Deputy Reggie Jernigan were bringing Derek and Alex to the Escambia County Sheriff's Office. When Sanderson and Kilgore stepped into the interrogation room to come face-to-face with the suspects, they were met with two undersized boys looking like vagabonds with bushy hair and mismatched, oversized clothes. Despite the gravity of the situation, Derek politely asked for a soda and greeted the detectives with an eager smile and wide, watchful eyes. Alex, conversely, was much more direct and matter-of-fact. As the detectives separated the brothers and began recording their statements, their initial reactions shifted to profound shock. The children detailed a gruesome narrative where Derek struck the fatal blows with a baseball bat while Alex watched and encouraged him. Sanderson was particularly struck by how chillingly cool Alex remained throughout the interview, noting that the 12-year-old described the brutal slaughter of his father as casually as if he were discussing a complete stranger. Because the boys' confessions so perfectly matched the forensic evidence found at the charred crime scene, the deputies were convinced the brothers had murdered their father simply to escape his strict rules. The interrogation quickly culminated in their arrests. While other children their age were eating dinner or doing homework, Alex and Derek were arrested, fingerprinted, photographed, and booked into the Escambia County Jail on charges of first-degree murder. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. While the boys' confessions secured their own arrests, the details they provided also laid the direct groundwork for the eventual arrest of Ricky Chavis. During the interrogations, the brothers admitted that immediately after the murder, they called Chavis, who picked them up and took them to his trailer where they showered and cleaned their clothes before the police were notified. Alex also let slip that Chavis was the one who had planted the idea that Terry King's strict staring constituted mental abuse. Armed with the knowledge that Chavis had hidden the runaway boys, washed their clothes, and repeatedly lied to deputies during his own interviews, investigators zeroed in on him. The turning point arrived when Chavis was subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury on December 11, 2001. After Chavis blatantly perjured himself by lying about living alone and denying any inappropriate relationship with Alex, sheriff's investigators arrested him later that same day. He was initially charged as an accessory after the fact to capital murder and with tampering with evidence, specifically for hiding the boys and washing their clothes to cover up the crime. However, the legal web entangled him further when the King brothers later changed their stories before the grand jury, testifying that Chavis had not only molested Alex, but had orchestrated the crime and actually swung the baseball bat that killed their father. Based on this explosive new testimony, the charges against Chavis dramatically escalated, and in April 2002, he was indicted for first-degree murder, arson, and sexual battery. In late August and early September of 2002, the Pensacola judicial system became the stage for a highly unusual and controversial legal spectacle involving the murder of Terry King. In an unprecedented move, Assistant State Attorney David Rimmer decided to try 40-year-old Ricky Chavis and the two juvenile King brothers in separate, back-to-back trials for the exact same crime. Rather than presenting a single, cohesive narrative, the prosecution presented two inherently irreconcilable theories to two different juries. Legal experts across the country severely criticized this bifurcated approach, pointing out that by arguing completely different accounts of the physical acts of the homicide, the state was essentially admitting that it harbored reasonable doubt regarding who actually swung the murder weapon. The legal drama began in August with the trial of Ricky Chavis. During this trial, Rimmer argued that Chavis himself was the physical executioner who beat Terry King to death with an aluminum baseball bat to cover up a sexual relationship with Alex and avoid punishment. To support this theory, the prosecutor called Alex and Derek to the witness stand, where the boys testified under oath that they had hidden in the trunk of Chavis's car, while the older man went inside their Cantonment home and murdered their father. Despite presenting this narrative, Rimmer lacked enthusiasm during the proceedings, telling the jury that he was simply presenting the evidence, did not have a dog in this fight, and would leave it up to them to decide Chavis's guilt. Following a short deliberation, the jury arrived at a verdict. However, Circuit Judge Frank Bell immediately sealed it, ordering the attorneys not to divulge the outcome so that it would not taint the jury pool for the brothers' upcoming trial. A week later, the same prosecutor stood before a newly seated jury for the trial of Alex and Derek King and presented a completely different narrative. In this second trial, Rimmer contended that Chavis was not present at the scene at all. Instead, he argued that Derek, with Alex's active planning and encouragement, had physically bludgeoned their father to death. The prosecution theorized that the boys wanted to escape their strict father and live with Chavis, who allowed them to indulge. Rimmer relied heavily on the boys' initial taped confessions to the police, dismissing their later testimonies against Chavis as lies. In response, defense attorneys James Stokes and Sharon Potter passionately argued that Chavis was the true mastermind and killer, asserting that Chavis was a convicted pedophile and had manipulated and coached the frightened boys into falsely confessing to the police by promising them that they would receive light sentences as juveniles. On September 6, 2002, the six-person jury in the brothers' trial delivered a verdict that multiplied the confusion. The jury convicted Derek and Alex of arson and a lesser charge of second-degree murder without a weapon. Operating without knowledge of Chavis's sealed verdict, the jurors had essentially compromised by creating a third theory that neither the prosecution nor the defense had argued. They believed Ricky Chavis had actually wielded the bat, but that the boys were culpable because they unlocked the door and let him into the house to commit the crime. Immediately after the boys' verdict was read, the court finally published the sealed verdict from the first trial, revealing to the stunned courtroom that Chavis had been acquitted. The boys' jury forewoman, Lynn Schwartz, expressed profound shock upon discovering that the man her jury believed to be the true killer had been cleared of the murder, lamenting that it was too bad all three defendants could not have been tried together for a fairer trial. The fact that the boys were convicted of murder without a weapon, despite Terry King being undeniably bludgeoned to death, illustrated the structural failure of the prosecution's dual trial strategy. This legal absurdity and the ethical crisis of the state's competing narratives culminated in a dramatic judicial intervention on October 17, 2002, when Judge Bell threw out the boys' second-degree murder convictions, declaring the prosecutor's handling of the case unusual and bizarre. Noting that simultaneous prosecutions under irreconcilable theories violated the children's constitutional right to due process, Judge Bell stated there was no question the boys had been denied a fair trial. After leaving Terry King, the boys' mother remarried and relocated to Lexington, Kentucky, but the marriage eventually ended in divorce. Seeking a fresh start, she officially changed her name from Janet French to Kelly Marino, a decision made partly to hide from her recent ex-husband, and partly because she simply liked the name, having drawn inspiration from her favorite character on the television show Charlie's Angels. It had been more than 3 years since she had last seen her sons when tragedy struck her former family in November 2001. When Escambia County investigator John Sanderson finally managed to track her down following the house fire, he discovered that Kelly already knew about Terry's death and that her children were missing. While that reality was shocking and surreal enough, she was profoundly devastated when the investigator delivered his next blow, informing her that authorities suspected her young sons had brutally murdered their father. Following Judge Frank Bell's unprecedented decision to throw out the King brothers' murder convictions, the fate of the young defendants was handed over to a highly unusual court-ordered mediation. The monumental task of brokering a deal fell to 56-year-old Bill Edens, a seasoned attorney, former prosecutor, and defense lawyer who stepped in as the mediator. The first mediation session was a tense, secretive affair marked by attorneys scurrying between closed doors while reporters and family members waited anxiously in the courthouse hallway. After 6 exhaustive hours, the initial round ended without a resolution, largely because Assistant State Attorney David Rimmer remained absolutely adamant about securing adult sanctions and prison time for the boys. By this time, Kelly Marino was already heavily involved and highly vocal. Convinced of her children's absolute innocence, Kelly was deeply unimpressed with the defense strategies of their attorneys, Sharon Potter and James Stokes, and feared they would force her boys to plead guilty to a crime they did not commit. Because she still retained her rights as the boys' legal guardian, Kelly began working closely with a new pair of high-powered Miami attorneys whose services had been funded by celebrity Rosie O'Donnell. She fiercely insisted that Stokes and Potter include her in the closed-door mediation process, going so far as to threaten to fire them and officially retain the Miami lawyers if a plea deal was brokered without her support. When the second round of mediation commenced a week later, the attorneys arrived prepared for an arduous battle, but the juvenile defendants themselves seemed remarkably oblivious to the gravity of the heated discussions determining their lives. Instead of agonizing over the prospect of life in prison, Alex and Derek found a fingerprinting kit and spent their time playfully inflating latex gloves into 5-fingered volleyballs. After nightfall, a breakthrough was finally reached that would spare the children from life behind bars. The brothers agreed to plead guilty to third-degree murder and arson. In exchange, Derek received an 8-year prison sentence, while Alex accepted a 7-year term and committed to testifying against Ricky Chavis in his upcoming trials. The agreement also required the boys to submit handwritten confessions, a stipulation that produced a surprisingly defiant and humorous response from Alex. Known as an avid reader with a fanatical devotion to proper grammar and spelling, the 12-year-old deliberately drafted a sloppy, misspelled statement reading, "Derek got bat and hit dad head," which amused his attorneys, but was readily accepted by the court. However, the finalized plea deal faced a dramatic final challenge when an outraged Kelly Marino brought her newly hired Miami attorneys to court to halt the proceedings. They filed a last-minute motion, arguing the boys were not competent to make such a lifelong deal, and requested a psychiatric evaluation. An irate Judge Bell swiftly denied the motion, stating the outside lawyers lacked legal standing, and validating the defense attorney's assertions that the boys were highly intelligent and fully comprehended the agreement. With the pleas officially entered, Alex and Derek were fingerprinted and later transported to the North Florida Reception Center. Ultimately, despite Rimmer and Judge Bell's fierce lobbying to keep them in an adult prison, state officials placed the brothers in juvenile facilities where they could receive age-appropriate education and counseling. Meanwhile, the final outcomes for the adult defendant, Ricky Chavis, unfolded in 2 subsequent trials where he faced severe penalties. In November 2002, Chavis was convicted of acting as an accessory after the fact to first-degree murder and tampering with evidence for hiding the runaways and washing their clothes, and was handed a 30-year maximum sentence. Months later, in March 2003, with Alex fulfilling his mediation agreement to testify against him, Chavis faced a trial for kidnapping and child molestation. Although a jury acquitted him of the molestation charges, he was found guilty of false imprisonment for concealing the boys from their frantic father. Judge Bell imposed an additional 5-year maximum sentence for that unconscionable deception, cementing Chavis's total penalty at 35 years in state prison. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. By early March 2003, Kelly Marino was navigating a bittersweet reality as she adjusted to her son's incarcerations. Having unsuccessfully attempted to halt the boys' mediation agreement, she continued to assert her children's absolute innocence, maintaining that they only pleaded guilty to third-degree murder because Ricky Chavis had deceived them into taking the fall. With Derek and Alex now housed in separate juvenile facilities across Florida, Kelly made the arduous trips from her home in Lexington, Kentucky, to visit them, eagerly shopping for hygiene products and shoes to send them in an effort to maintain her maternal bond. Her attention, however, remained fiercely fixed on the fate of Ricky Chavis, who faced his final trial for kidnapping and molesting 12-year-old Alex. When the jury acquitted Chavis of the most severe charges on March 5, 2003, convicting him only of the lesser offense of false imprisonment, a visibly disappointed Kelly told reporters, "It's an outrage. It's insane." Determined to intervene and ensure he faced the harshest possible consequences, Kelly was instantly on her feet during the sentencing phase. She stood before Judge Frank Bell and pleaded for the maximum penalty, declaring that Chavis could never pay a high enough price for the devastating destruction he had wrought upon her children's lives. When the judge handed down the maximum 5-year consecutive sentence for false imprisonment, totaling Chavis's prison time at 35 years, Kelly's demeanor shifted to relief. She called the outcome a happy ending to a very hard year and a half. Telling the press she hoped Chavis would be a very old man when he was finally released, before she hurried off to share the good news with her sons. But Kelly's own life would soon fracture under the weight of a shocking legal scandal. On May 21, 2003, the mother who had so vocally championed her children's victimhood was arrested in Lexington, Kentucky, for Social Security fraud. According to an arrest warrant, Kelly had provided false information to the Social Security Administration in order to illegally collect the survivor benefits intended for Alex and Derek following the murder of their father. Authorities discovered she had cashed 4 checks worth more than $13,000, leading to her arrest on 4 counts of theft by deception. She was placed in the county jail, where she spent a week awaiting her court date, gaining a small, bitter taste of what her young sons had endured. For the boys' defense team, the arrest was an expected conclusion to her erratic involvement in the case. Derek's attorney, Sharon Potter, publicly stated she was not surprised, suggesting Kelly had always been trying to profit off her son's tragedy, and noting that the boys likely harbored no remaining illusions about her ever truly being a mother to them. In the months following Kelly Marino's arrest and brief stint in a Kentucky county jail, the tragic saga of the King family took a heartbreaking turn that deeply affected the boys' legal defense team. On June 11, 2003, James Stokes, the fiery former Marine who had fiercely defended 12-year-old Alex King, was killed in an ultralight aircraft accident. Stokes and his best friend, John Johnson, perished when the plane they had purchased just 2 months prior crashed in a wooded area outside of Pensacola. Knowing how much the attorney meant to her son, Kelly Marino frantically called Alex's juvenile facility, ensuring that his psychologist and his counselor, Darren Washington, were present to comfort the boy when he received the devastating news. Derek King was informed of the tragedy by the facility's chaplain. Stokes was mourned by a community that loved him, and his funeral was a poignant reflection of his vibrant life and military pride. He lay in a flag-draped casket adorned with a helicopter pin in his lapel and a circle of red, white, and blue flowers bearing a Semper Fi banner. The service was packed, drawing attendees from all walks of life, including prosecutor David Rimmer, who remembered Stokes as a zealous and worthy opponent. Defense attorneys Sharon Potter and Dennis Corder stayed long at the funeral home, sharing fond memories of their colleagues' generosity and courtroom antics. Even Jimmy Walker, the boy's step-grandfather, rushed directly from work to pay his respects, arriving in a borrowed, ill-fitting shirt bearing the name Ken, just to ensure he didn't miss the viewing. The sorrow that shadowed the defense team only deepened as the year drew to a close. Early in the afternoon of December 30th, 2003, Dennis Corder, Sharon Potter's law partner and Derek King's co-counsel, took a drive along a scenic highway between Navarre and Pensacola Beach. Parking his Nissan Sentra between the Gulf of Mexico and the Santa Rosa Sound, the brilliant 42-year-old attorney took his own life with a shotgun blast. His suicide sent shockwaves through Pensacola's legal community. Known for his flawless law school admission scores and sharp intellect, Corder had successfully hidden a long-fought battle with depression from almost everyone except his wife, Donna. At his memorial service, Donna Corder greeted a long stream of mourners that included Judge Frank Bell, David Rimmer, and the boys' grandparents, Jimmy and Lisa French, who were all in disbelief over the loss of yet another attorney tied to the King case. Colleagues warmly remembered Corder as the burning bush, the definitive voice they turned to settle legal arguments, and celebrated his passionate advocacy for the underdog. The back-to-back losses left Sharon Potter utterly devastated, forcing her to struggle through the grief of losing both a talented law partner and a dear friend. Meanwhile, as 2003 ended, Ricky Chavis began his 35-year sentence. He took a one-way trip to the Jackson Correctional Institute in Malone, Florida, where his high-profile trials and public exposure as a convicted child molester made him an immediate target. Labeled a tree jumper by the prison population, a derogatory term for predators who target children, Chavis faced the grim reality of navigating a highly dangerous prison environment, isolated from the network of enablers he once relied upon. Following the dramatic conclusion of their trials and subsequent plea agreements, the King brothers and their former manipulator, Ricky Chavis, settled into the stark realities of their respective incarcerations during 2004 and 2005. For Derek King, the state's decision to place him in a juvenile facility meant a transfer to the Omega Juvenile Prison in Palmetto, Florida. Billed as the final stop in the juvenile system before the adult prisons, Omega utilized a strict, boot camp-style program where new arrivals were stripped of all privileges and isolated from the general population. Derek spent the vast majority of his days locked inside his cell, emerging only to attend educational classes. Earning back basic luxuries, such as books, colored pencils, and longer telephone times, proved to be a slow and arduous process. For many months, his phone calls to his family were strictly limited to 5 minutes. Plagued by an unbearable loneliness and isolation, Derek poured his sorrow into letters to his relatives, at one point desperately begging his grandmother just to sign her name to a card if she was too busy to write. His younger brother, Alex, was placed in the Okeechobee Correctional Institution. Initially, Alex appeared to make promising strides under the firm but positive guidance of his counselor, Darren Washington. the highly intelligent boy quickly memorized the facility's mission statement, a task that took others weeks to master, and earned the nickname Anakin from his fellow inmates. Despite these early flashes of potential and a seemingly positive rapport with his counselor, Alex's adjustment behind bars took a turbulent turn. The emotional toll of his traumatic past and his confinement ultimately culminated in a desperate bid for freedom. In 2005, the 15-year-old was officially charged with attempting to escape from the juvenile prison. Meanwhile, the boy's former adult companion, Ricky Chavis, was navigating a highly dangerous existence in the adult prison system. Serving a 35-year sentence, Chavis was sent to the Jackson Correctional Institute and later the Century Correctional Institution. The intense national media scrutiny surrounding the King murder trials had thoroughly exposed his dark history, stripping away his carefully crafted facade. Isolated from the young, vulnerable boys he once manipulated and the enabling network of friends he had once relied upon, Chavis faced the terrifying reality of life among hardened criminals. In a brutal environment where pedophiles were frequently the targets of fatal, vigilante-style beatings by other inmates, the former mastermind was forced to live in constant fear for his own safety. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. After years spent navigating the juvenile and adult penal systems, the King brothers finally tasted freedom, though their transitions back into society unfolded on different timelines and with vastly different outcomes. At the age of 18, Alex King was released from state custody on April 9, 2008, having served 6 years for his role in his father's death. His older brother Derek was paroled a year later on March 7, 2009, at the age of 20, after serving 7 years. Despite the optimistic facade they would soon present to the world, the fallout from their traumatic pasts and subsequent incarcerations heavily impacted their reintegration. Having been the primary target of Ricky Chavis's predatory grooming and sexual abuse, Alex carried deep, unaddressed psychological trauma into the outside world. Lacking the sustained, specialized clinical support necessary to address this profound damage, the younger King brother faced immense challenges in maintaining behavioral stability. Nevertheless, immediately following Derek's release, the brothers embarked on a highly publicized media campaign designed to project an image of successful rehabilitation and shared ambition. In an effort to reclaim their narrative, they agreed to a high-profile appearance on The Today Show with Matt Lauer on September 8, 2009. During the national television broadcast, the young men appeared resolute and forward-looking, emphasizing their desire for a fresh start and their intentions to become productive citizens. They announced plans to attend the same junior college and focus on their futures. Derek's demeanor was calm as he addressed the gravity of their past, stating, "Not to minimize the situation, but we all make mistakes, and we shouldn't be judged on one act and one spot in our life." Alex echoed this sentiment, projecting a focused and ambitious attitude when he noted, "We spend our days planning job hunts and classes we are going to take, as opposed to reliving the past." During the segment, Alex publicly credited Christian counseling for his rehabilitation and expressed gratitude to celebrity advocate Rosie O'Donnell for championing their case. Their media exposure also included a special Dateline NBC broadcast entitled Second Chances, which featured emotional footage of the brothers' first reunion get-together after years of separation. Despite the optimistic facade presented to the nation during their Today Show appearance, the reality of Derek and Alex King's reintegration into society unfolded on two starkly different paths. Derek King successfully managed to navigate his newfound freedom, deliberately retreating from public scrutiny to live a quiet life. Making good on his televised promise that they shouldn't be judged by a single mistake, he maintained a low profile and completely avoided any further contact with the criminal justice system. On the other hand, Alex King found himself unable to outrun the lingering shadows of his traumatic past. As the primary target of Ricky Chavis's sexual abuse and manipulation, Alex carried deep, unaddressed psychological scars into the outside world. Although he had publicly credited Christian counseling for his rehabilitation upon his release, he lacked the sustained, specialized clinical support necessary to heal from the core damage of the pedophilic grooming he endured as a child. Alex King's hopes for a successful reintegration into society were severely derailed in 2011 when he was arrested for a parole violation after fleeing the scene of a vehicle accident. The incident resulted in his reincarceration, a harsh contrast to the optimistic, forward-looking image he had projected on non-national television following his initial release. Observers and child advocates have long noted that Alex was never provided with the proper psychological tools or the comprehensive, trauma-informed rehabilitation necessary to process the severe abuse he endured. Experts and commentators reflecting on his life pointed out that being so deeply involved with a convicted sex offender at such a vulnerable age inevitably left lasting damage, making an eventual crash and burn almost inevitable without sustained clinical support. Following his release from his second stint in prison, Alex's life continued on a tragic downward trajectory as he remained unable to break free from the cycle of unaddressed trauma and psychological self-destruction. His ongoing struggles with these enduring demons ultimately culminated on April 23, 2024, when Alex King succumbed to a fatal drug overdose in Montana, dying at the age of 35. His devastating demise served as a somber final chapter to a highly publicized tragedy, pointing a spotlight onto the failures of the system in addressing the core trauma of abused children navigating the justice system. More than 25 years later, the murder of Terry King stands as a case defined not only by violence, but by the decisions made after it. Assistant State Attorney David Rimmer prosecuted Ricky Chavis and the King brothers in separate trials using mutually incompatible theories, arguing in one courtroom that Chavis carried out the killing himself, while arguing in another that Derek King was the one who delivered the fatal blows. In pursuing convictions through contradictory narratives, the prosecution left the central question of who killed Terry King unresolved. The approach eventually led a judge to overturn the brothers' convictions and order the extraordinary step of mediation in a murder case, exposing the consequences of building prosecutions around conflicting versions of the same crime. The case also resists simple definitions of good and evil. Alex and Derek King grew up amid instability, neglect, and prolonged sexual exploitation at the hands of Ricky Chavis. Chavis, in turn, had endured years of severe abuse and neglect within the foster care system before becoming an abuser himself. None of that excuses what followed, but it illustrates how cycles of violence can echo across generations when trauma goes untreated and vulnerable children are left without protection or support. As of 2026, the lives of those involved have followed very different paths. Paroled in 2009, Derek King withdrew from public attention and, by all available accounts, has lived quietly without any further involvement in the criminal justice system. Ricky Chavis remains imprisoned at Century Correctional Institution, serving his state sentence. His criminal conduct continued even while incarcerated. In 2016, he pleaded guilty in federal court to being a felon in possession of a firearm and received an additional 65-month sentence. The death of Terry King remains one of Florida's most unusual murder cases, not only because of the crime itself, but because of the questions it raised about justice, accountability, and the lasting effects of childhood abuse. It is a case where every life involved had already been shaped by years of damage long before the murder occurred, and where the consequences continue to extend far beyond a single night in November 2001.